Good evening, Tricky Mick here. The Supreme Court rejects student loan relief. The Supreme Court says the First Amendment entitles web designers to refuse same sex wedding work. And the Supreme Court's affirmative action ruling a victory for protecting the American dream. I'm Tricky Mick, and these are today's topics. So let's get right into it. What the Supreme Court's rejection of student loan relief means for borrowers. In one of the most anticipated decisions of its current term, the U.S. Supreme Court has struck down President Biden's sweeping plan to discharge some or all federal student loan debt for tens of millions of Americans. In a 6-3 decision, the High Court ruled that the Biden administration did not have authority under a 2003 federal law to forgive hundreds of billions of dollars of student debt. The HEROES Act allows the Secretary of Education to waive or modify existing statutory or regulatory provisions applicable to financial assistance programs under the Education Act, the ruling states, but does not allow the Secretary to rewrite that statute to the extent of canceling $430 billion of student loan principal. Now let's continue on down here. 1. Millions of borrowers are feeling collective disappointment. Biden's plan would have provided relief to most federal student loan borrowers, as many as 43 million people. That's roughly 1 in 8 Americans. Nearly half of those borrowers, roughly 20 million, could have had their student loans erased completely. Now, 1 in 8 Americans, that's quite a lot if you think about it. Whatever you think of Biden's proposal in this moment, the collective disappointment and perhaps disillusionment of so many Americans is palpable and worth acknowledging. I feel like it's back to business as usual, says borrower Kurt Patton with a long sigh. What else can I do? Go back to paying the student loan that I have been paying for 20 plus years? Well, yeah, maybe you should pay the debt. Patton took out federal student loans to pay his way through college and dutifully made monthly payments from late 2003 until March 2020 when the pandemic payment pause began. There's this mental weight that you carry with the student loan, knowing that it'll be with you as far as you can go into your foreseeable future. Now, I see no difference between this and, getting a business loan to start something like, say, a trucking company like where I'm at, or, maybe somebody wants to start their own market or a pizza shop. There's all kinds of different things that people choose to invest in. And I don't understand why somebody thinks that their college investment is any different or that they should be entitled to receive money from somebody else for the choices that they made. It's a little bit ridiculous to me. So continuing on. It's really tragic that student loan borrowers have been stuck in this position as political pawns, says Persis Yu of the Student Borrower Protection Center, and now are victims to a politicized court that is willing to jeopardize their financial security for political gain. Now, give me a break. You are not a victim when you choose to go to college. That is a choice that you have made. I didn't make that choice for you, and neither did the guy working down the street at Walmart who has to pay his taxes. And it's a bit ridiculous that people expect the average regular worker to contribute their taxes to things like this. I mean, it's just completely backwards to think that somebody making $100,000 a year, but sometimes half of that, is helping pay the loans of a doctor, a lawyer, or any number of things, that someone might have went to college for. It's very, very offensive to me and everybody else like me. I see it as an unfortunate reality that in a country where we bail out Fortune 100 companies, where we bail out banks that have not been good actors, that the Supreme Court would allow that to happen. And yet, says Derek Johnson, the NAACP's president and CEO, the court would choose to leave millions of borrowers stuck in a vicious cycle of debt that they chose to start. Now, I don't agree with bailing the banks out and bailing out the Fortune 100 companies as well. That's something that I also do disagree with. So we're on the same page on a lot of things with that. In the lead up to the court's decision, Johnson sent a letter to Biden advising him, in the case of an unfavorable ruling, to pursue all legal pathways to erase student loan debts. Now, again, I want to ask, should they also erase the debt of the trucking company owner who risks it all every single day, all the regulations? Should they get rid of the debt for the guy who started the pizzeria? Should they get rid of the debt for any number of different choices people made? Because going to college is a choice that you made. It is not a choice that other people made for you. Let us be clear, Johnson warned. Absent further swift action in the wake of an unfavorable ruling from the court, black voters stand to be incredibly disillusioned by an administration who failed to deliver on key campaign promises but succeeded in widening the racial wealth gap. So, It kind of sounds like Biden was bribing voters just a little bit with promising something he couldn't deliver on. All right, so let's run through the points a little bit quicker now. It's a win for Republicans who opposed Biden's loan cancellation plan. But that's a very big, obvious thing. I think that most people who work for a living probably oppose Biden's loan cancellation plan. 3. Borrowers will soon have to start repaying their loans again, and it could get ugly. They could have been paying them this whole time. They could have made advanced payments at the beginning. They could have chosen cheaper colleges to go to. They could have chosen a cheaper car. There's an incredible number of ways that these people could have saved money that the average American is doing every single day who didn't go to college. There are people working 60, 70 hours a week who will eat ramen every single day. Sometimes they won't even have food. I mean, that's the reality of living and making decisions. Your decision to go to college is a personal choice that you made. It wasn't necessary to, find work or to find gainful employment. We'll go to the next point here. 4. It is possible that loan servicers may be overwhelmed. Now, this is an interesting point that I did not consider. After a political fight between Democrats and Republicans over Biden's debt relief plan, Congress flat-funded FSA for this year, making it all but impossible for it to keep up with its many student loan responsibilities. Already, the agency has quietly delayed an effort promised by the Biden administration to review the loans of millions of borrowers who are unfairly set back by years of mismanagement around income-driven repayment plans. Promised in May, that review has been extended into 2024. This is something that we should probably look a little bit more into and try to push forward. Having a plan to pay this back, and I personally think there shouldn't be any type of interest on student loans. That's one thing I would unanimously support with people. Let's move on to the last point here. 5. Student loan debt is growing to keep up with college costs, and Biden's plan wouldn't have changed that. Yep, that is the biggest issue with college. You're getting a lot more administration, but you're not getting a lot more professors, and you're not getting a better college degree. You're not getting better educators. You're just getting a bigger bill to go to that college more than anything else. Before publishing the story, I pre-wrote 2 different versions. One if the court had preserved Biden's debt relief plan, another in case it scrapped it. Both versions had the same ending. Biden's debt relief plan, as generous as it was, would have done nothing to address the growing levels of student loan debt borrowers are taking on. The U.S. government will continue to issue loans to help Americans afford college, even as colleges raise prices, forcing Americans to take out even more loans. You don't have to go to college. Again, that's a personal choice. I recognize that our current system is broken, U.S. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona told lawmakers in May. Fox echoes that sentiment. The system is totally broken and has been broken for a long, long time, she says, highlighting Republican efforts to limit interest on debts on students. The inflation-adjusted cost of college has nearly doubled since 1990, from about $15,000 a year to $29,000 in 2020, and students are using loans to keep up. Between 1995 and 2017, federal student loan debt increased more than sevenfold, from $187 billion to $1.4 trillion in 2017 dollars. So it's more like $2.5 trillion now, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. The Biden administration does have a plan to address that brokenness, and it hinges on a newly proposed, much more forgiving, income-driven repayment plan, one that has drawn praise from borrower advocates and sharp criticism from Republicans. Even if the administration is able to roll out this new plan, though, it's unclear how quickly it will be available to borrowers returning to prepayment. What's more, implementing a new income-driven repayment plan is radically different from the status quo, will require incredible investment and support for borrowers. Again, loan servicers, call center employees are the voice of the federal student loan program, and the system will need more of them, and they'll need more training to implement any new repayment plan. The fact that servicers are being told to slash service right now is not a hopeful sign. That's right, and I really hope that things do get better. But again, we need to really sit and talk to people before they make that decision to go to college and decide if that is the right choice for them. We're telling everyone they need to go to college, they need to get a 10-year degree, and some of these people are graduating college and they're not even making $60,000 a year for $100,000 in debt or more for some of the people who went, for multiple years. I mean, just because it's a 2-year degree doesn't mean that it's only going to take you 2 years. Many people spend 4 to 6 years getting those degrees. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Supreme Court says First Amendment entitles web designer to refuse same-sex wedding work. I don't really like the title. I don't really agree with that statement, but that's the title. In a major decision affecting LGBTQ rights, the U.S. Supreme Court on Friday carved out a significant exception to public accommodations laws that in most states bar discrimination based on sexual orientation. By a 6-3 vote, the court sided with Lori Smith, a Colorado web designer who is opposed to same-sex marriage. She challenged the state's public accommodations laws, claiming that by requiring her to serve everyone equally, the state was unconstitutionally enlisting her in creating a message she opposes. Now, I do agree with that. On Friday, the Supreme Court agreed with her. Writing for the conservative majority, Justice Neil Gorsuch drew a distinction between discrimination based on a person's status, her gender, race, and other classifications, and discrimination based on her message. If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, he said, it is that the government may not interfere with an uninhibited marketplace of ideas. When a state law collides with the Constitution, he added, the Constitution must prevail. The decision was limited because of what might have been contested about the facts of the case was stipulated, namely that Smith intends to work with couples to produce a customized story for their websites using her words and original artwork. Given those facts, Gorsuch said, Smith qualifies for constitutional protection, which I agree with. He acknowledged that Friday's decisions may result in misguided, even hurtful messages. But, he said, the nation's answer is tolerance, not coercion. The First Amendment envisions the United States as a rich and complex place where all persons are free to think and speak as they wish, not as the government demands, which is kind of a little bit backwards from the way that things have been going the last couple of years. We've seen a lot of attacks on the freedom of speech and the rights of people to freely think and speak as they want, especially in the social media aspect. Court's liberal dissent. In a blistering dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said that Lori Smith's objection amounts to discrimination against the status of same-sex couples, discrimination because of who they are. Speaking for the court's 3 liberal justices, she said, time and again, businesses and other commercial entities have claimed a constitutional right to discriminate, and time and again, this court has courageously stood up to those claims. Until today, this court shrinks. Now, I absolutely disagree with that. There's a huge difference between somebody creatively making a website that is using their own artwork, their own words, versus somebody who's saying, I'm not going to serve you because, you're gay or you're black or you're white or something like that. These are 2 very different ideas and concepts. When you're creating something like that, you have the freedom of expression, the right to free speech, essentially. And, when the state tries to coerce free speech like that, you start losing the very essence of freedom, which, in my opinion, is the most important thing about this country, the freedom of speech. The lesson of the history of public accommodations laws is that in a free and democratic society, there can be no social caste. For the promise of freedom is an empty one if the government is powerless to assure that $1 in the hands of one person will purchase the same thing as $1 in the hands of another. Just what today's decision means for the future is unclear. A limited decision. Jenny Pizer, Chief Legal Officer of Lambda Legal, called the decision limited. This decision says that the laws apply effectively to everyone, but doesn't apply to this type of business, and I think there's an enormous question moving forward, she said. How is this going to be applied to the range of goods and services that involve some customizing and arguably some artistry, depending on the eye of the beholder? So what about a cemetery that refuses to engrave a headstone with the words beloved partner? Or a web designer asked to simply announce the time and place for a same-sex wedding? Or a tailor who refuses to make a suit for a same-sex groom? What about the dressmaker who refused to make a gown for Melania Trump to wear at her husband's inauguration in 2017? Michael McConnell, director of the Stanford Center for Constitutional Law, wrote about that question in an academic book chapter, and the Washington Post wrote about it. Virtually everyone interviewed for a Washington Post story thought it was extremely important that this dress designer was able to refuse to create a gown for the Trump inauguration, McConnell said in an interview with NPR. And I don't think a tailor is different from a dressmaker, he added. Justice Gorsuch, in his majority opinion, characterizes these as a sea of hypotheticals, observes Brigham Young University law professor Brett Scharf. What he had to say is that these cases are not this case. University of Virginia law professor Douglas Laycock says there likely will be many follow-up cases probing the outer boundaries of Friday's court decision. But, he says, the core of this is you can't be compelled to use your creative talents in service of speech that you fundamentally disagree with. That's a pretty clear category, and that's exactly what's being discussed today. My prediction is that we will not see a lot of these cases, says Yale law professor William Eskridge, who has written extensively about gay rights. Most religious people, including fundamentalist people, do not want to discriminate against LGBTQ persons, particularly in their commercial businesses, he says, and most LGBTQ don't want to sue. Lambda Legal's Jenny Pizer is not so sanguine. The danger here is the message and the understanding that this court majority consistently favors those who seek to discriminate, she said. And that sends a particularly alarming message to members of communities who are under sustained attack. This is the world that many of us are living in, she adds. The civil rights protections are essential for our ability to participate in society. And I do agree with that. The civil rights are extraordinarily important in this country. And if they had not been implemented through law in the way that they should have been done, we would see a very different America than we do today. I mean, there are enormous strides that have been made throughout history, and I'm very, very thankful to be born in the United States. On to the next one. The Supreme Court's affirmative action ruling, a victory for protecting the American dream. As we celebrate another year of American independence, we unite around the ideals that sealed the founding of our nation. The freedom, hope, and opportunity this country provides is what defines the promise of America and has made us a global leader for 247 years. Our work to form a more perfect union and live up to this promise are the gears that keep this great experiment running. Now, I want to reiterate that. Live up to this promise. We don't always live up to the promises, but we do our best. The Supreme Court ruling that race-based admissions practices at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina are unconstitutional is a tremendous victory for protecting the American dream for all students and working toward that more perfect union comprised of a melting pot of diverse ideals where all are created equal. Race-based education policies counter the values we hold dear and divide us as a nation, undermine global competitiveness, and prevent students from reaching their full potential. Telling students that their race matters more than their merit is a dangerous message that encourages racial discrimination. These out-of-touch policies keep the American dream out of reach for hardworking Americans, including many in the Asian American and Pacific Islanders community. That is why Californians voted to ban these discriminatory policies in public universities and other public entities through the passage of Proposition 209. I pushed back on attempts to revive them since 2020. We've also seen both to go even further, basing curriculum for all students to meet standards of lowest performing students. For the past 2 years, I have sent letters to the California Board of Education President Linda Darling Hammond opposing the board's proposed math framework to phase out advanced math classes to address systemic racism in mathematics. Math's not racist. I mean, 1 plus 1 equals 2. I don't really see how anyone can even add race. Like, what? That makes sense. Imposing one size curriculum to meet the needs of lowest performing students standardizes a race at the bottom academically, stifles students' growth, and hurts our nation's global standing. We should find new ways to bring lower performing students up, not bring higher performing students down. We shouldn't stifle one student's growth in a subject at the expense of another student's abilities in a particular subject, especially when students fell drastically behind during the COVID-19. Ranking of students in the United States school math dropped from 11th out of 99 countries in 2018 to 30th this year. Additionally, according to a report released last year by the National Assessment of Educational Progress, less than half of California students met English language standards, and 1/3 met mathematics standards, and both decreased from before the pandemic. Without racial discrimination at admissions, California public universities continue to have racially diverse student bodies. 2/3 of the 2.8 million students work at the University of California, California State University, and California Community College, according to a report by the Campaign College Fraternity. Additionally, according to Anya Wu, Executive Director of Californians for Equal Rights Foundation, 4-year graduation rates of underrepresented racial minorities rose from 31.3% during the 95 to 97 period to 55.1% in 2014. Near my district county, Cal State University Fullerton, one half of bachelor's degrees of first-generation university graduates, and nearly half of the student body is Hispanic. In 2021, I invited Education Secretary Miguel Cardona to visit CSUF and see firsthand their quality educational services. I have not heard back. We do not empower Americans of all backgrounds through racial discrimination. We empower Americans of all backgrounds by ending racial discrimination. That is what the case is all about. I am grateful for making sacrifices for my family to the U.S. legally in the aftermath of the Korean War to have the chance of their life. I'm proud Korean American and Asian American, and my story reflects the story of so many proud immigrants and Asian Americans across the nation. I also am not here because I am Asian. I am here because I worked my butt off to achieve the American dream, and I'm fighting every day to keep that dream alive for future generations. College boards determining whose family story they deem more appealing than another family meeting. I've worked for educational opportunities for students and come to Congress because I believe education is the key to unlocking new doors for students. I led the Bipartisan Innovations and Informal STEM Learning Act, which became law through the CHIPS and Science Act to support after-school programs that expose students to STEM concepts. As co-chair of the Congressional App Challenge last Congress, I hosted the largest app challenge in history. With 192 student teams of middle and high school, we had more than 9,000 students skate across the country, creating more than 2,700 apps and 330 congressional districts. It also introduced bipartisan bicameral bill with Reps Raja Krishnamurti and Josh Gottheimer and Senators Chuck Grassley and Tina Smith to make college costs more transparent for students and families. According to a December 2022 government, 80% of college understate the total college, and 65% leave key details on packages. The Understanding the True Cost of College Act, HR 1198, would standardize aid forms so families can better navigate these decisions, figure out what option is best for them, and avoid student debt. We can improve educational outcomes for students and support opportunities for students to succeed without the opportunities because of race. The American dream does not require a Harvard degree, and the path to the American dream is a one-line road. There are many ways to achieve success, and I will keep fighting to ensure the promised America, where we are judged on our actions and can achieve success through our hard work, remains alive for future generations. So what do you think about affirmative action? Do you think that this is the right choice? I personally do. I think college is a very progressive policy to move forward on. Now to the rejection here, student loan relief, I would agree as well. There's no reason for these students to be absolved of responsibility like this. You wouldn't do this for the average American, working 60, 70 hours a week in a factory, right? And personally, I would agree with what the Supreme Court had to say about this particular case when it comes to the same-sex wedding work with the website here. I don't think that you can compel other people with their freedom of speech being removed like that. If anything, that's going to fuel the fire of those people even more to try and get around certain laws. Now, this is a pretty clear case in their creativity product and shouldn't have to bend their beliefs and their opinions on things to match what yours is. Again, so we've got the Supreme Court's rejection of student loan relief, which I agree with. The Supreme Court saying that the web designer does not have to do artistic work that is essentially their free speech for same-sex affirmative action is ended Supreme Court, which is a major reform. Well, I'm Mick. Today talks. I'll catch you next time.